Good morning and welcome to the 7th annual TIFF Doc Conference. Woo! Thanks for coming. We are in day 6 of the Toronto International Film Festival. The Doc Conference is a day-long event that is part of TIFF's broader industry conference. My name is Dorota Lech. I am the co-programmer of the Doc Conference, and I work in the programming department here at TIFF. I also work at Hot Docs, where I produce the Hot Docs Forum, a 2-day financing, co-production, and network market, and I will be your MC. At Doc Conference, we seek talks that make news, stir conversations, and point to new directions for both the creative and business side of documentary. Past speakers include Asif Kapadia, Werner Herzog, Errol Morris, Ramin Barani, Shala Lynch, Andrew Jarecki, Alanis Obamsawin, Errol Morris, Naomi Klein, and Michael Moore, and Ken Burns. This year's slate includes dynamic directors such as Raoul Peck, our keynote conversation, Tinwin Nyang, Steve James, Jonathan Demme, and Annette Burstein. Rounding out the conference, we also have editor extraordinaire Joe Binney, a session on VR, and a presentation by Great Big Story, who are also the sponsors of our cocktail following this day's conference at 5:30. For the run of the day, I would like to remind you that we have 2 breaks, one 15-minute break at 11:30 and one 30-minute break at 3 p.m. We also break for lunch at 12:45 to 1:45, during which time our new networking sessions, Doc Connections, will take place. The signups for Doc Connections, which went online a couple of weeks ago, are now full. This is, of course, very encouraging, and we're taking this as a signal to continue to expand this program. We have a very tight session turnaround between breaks and ask that if you leave, you please leave quietly. Also, please note that the Doc Conference seating is first come, first served, so we cannot guarantee your space if you do choose to leave. I would like to thank the CBC and Glenn Gould for accommodating us. This is one of our favorite days of the year, and we are so appreciative. I also want to thank the TIFF staff that helped make Doc Conference happen this year. Lynn Carter, Karina Rodenstein, Neil McPherson, Carter Bruce, Paul Dundas, Bronwyn Eady, Aaron Van Domlin, Talia Harrison Marcasa, Anita Kotick, Jonah Kamhorst, Vanya Garraway, Jason Avis, Krista McIsaac, Robin Richardson, and many more. Thank you. And thank you, of course, to our volunteers. I would like to now introduce the... Yes, volunteers! I'm also speaking to a completely dark room. I can't see a single person. This is a little terrifying. I would like to now introduce the founder of the Doc Conference, Tom Powers. Tom has served as the International Documentary Programmer for TIFF since 2006. He created and leads the Doc Conference and hosts the podcast Pure Nonfiction, interviewing documentary filmmakers. He curates for the digital streaming service Sundance Now Doc Club. He and his wife, Rafaela, serve as the directors of Doc NYC, and it is my pleasure to welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, Dorota, who's done so much to make this day possible. Last week, the TIFF Review, which is a relatively new feature on the TIFF website and an app publishing articles about cinema. I encourage you to check it out. They're doing some great work. But last week, they asked me to write a little bit about documentary film. And I was thinking about it, and what I wrote is that what an aphrodisiac is to romance, documentary is to conversation. It awakens our senses, it awakens our appetite to have conversations. And that's what we're going to be doing today, is having conversations. And as Dorota mentioned, this year I started a new podcast called Pure Nonfiction. That is a chance for me to capture and save some of the conversations that I've been having over the years, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. You can subscribe for free on iTunes or listen to it at purenonfiction.net. Some of the content today will be coming out later on the podcast. But each year here at Doc Conference, we've taken this opportunity to sort of take stock of where documentary is at and look forward to where we think documentary is going. And in different years, sometimes we've put a little bit more emphasis on the business side of documentary. And I always think of the business and creative as, not being two separate entities. Any of us who are making films know that they are constantly bleeding together, that business decisions affect creative decisions and vice versa. But today, as we put together this year's slate, I think we veered more towards creative conversations, looking at different forms of filmmaking. So we'll have Steve James later today talking about following a story. We'll have Nanette Burstein talking about working in the true crime genre. We'll have the filmmaking team who from Myanmar talking about truly low-budget filmmaking. I think they were describing their budget of $100 a month. That's where our focus is today. In the spirit of taking stock of where cinema is at and where it's going, I'd encourage you all to look at POV Magazine just yesterday on their website. Kevin McMahon published an open letter on the state of Canadian documentary that's a terrific piece. It'll probably take you longer to read that than today's entire doc conference because it's a little epic, but so worthwhile. At TIFF, we always are trying to seek a balance between veteran filmmakers, and I'm sure those documentary fans of the audience are looking out for new films by Werner Herzog and Alanis Obomsawin and Errol Morris that are playing here this year. But I hope you'll also keep an eye out for some of the new voices that are so important for us and so important part of our program. So I think of films like In Exile by Tin Nguyen Nang, who will be here later today. The film Business as Usual, which goes between Holland and Tunisia by Alex Pitstra. And Girl Unbound, about the Pakistani squash player Maria Torpakai Wazir by first-time director Aaron Heidenreich. So there's the whole rich array of documentaries. This year we have, throughout the TIFF program, there are 57 feature-length documentaries, more than we've ever programmed at the festival before. So it's a real testament to the richness of what's happening in documentary filmmaking today. We are very pleased to start this conference off with the filmmaker Raoul Peck, who is making his world premiere at the festival this week with his new film, I Am Not Your Negro. This is a tremendous film. As a little bit of background about Raoul, he was born in Haiti, I think around the age of 8. His family moved to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where he lived for many years. He was schooled in the United States and France and Berlin. A big breakthrough in his career was his 2000 feature film, narrative film, Lumumba, which he made after having previously made a documentary on Lumumba. He's been at the festival many times, and we're so pleased to have him back. Before I bring him out on stage to get this started, I want to show you a few minutes. I think it's the opening minutes of I Am Not Your Negro. So let's watch that now. Please welcome Raoul Peck. So, Raoul, at the center of this film is James Baldwin, in the text of James Baldwin. I wonder if you can tell me when you came to Baldwin's writing and what it meant to you.
Well, as a little boy, like many other black little boy like me, we had a very strange, if you were interested in literature, in film, we would always come to a point where we felt that this book, this film, were not telling our story. It did not represent what we were living in our everyday life. And at the time, there were not many authors that you could look up to. And as far as my life, well, I had Baldwin, Aimé Césaire, and Frantz Fanon, basically. And maybe Alejo Carpentier, you had also a few Latin American authors. But I started reading Baldwin when I was 16. And it made a big change. It really gave me the legitimacy of thinking, of accepting who I was. And he allows me to decipher the world around me. And in a very poetic way, real way, because he's at the same time a great, I would say, theorist and rhetoric. And at the same time, it's about your
theorist, not terrorist.
Yeah, theorist. Sorry. These days, it's dangerous to misspell that. And at the same time, it was about your daily life. You know, how do you watch film? How do you interact in a civil situation every day of your life? So, for a very long time, I felt like I grew up with Baldwin, and when I was in my 20s, I realized that I was saying a lot of things that were, in fact, Baldwin's. And so it wasn't much later that, for me, he was always part of my life. It's a kind of person, and I say person, but because it was not just his book, to whom you came back.
In that you were kind of watching how he conducted himself in public? Is that
Of
what you
course,
mean?
of course. And he was, don't forget, in the 60s, 70s, he was probably the only black artist and intellectual that you would see, as you see in the film, almost an hour in Dick Cavett's show, in a time where there was only 3 television network, Time magazine cover, etc., etc. He was almost a poster boy.
So I want to dig a little deeper, and I'm curious, like, were there specific texts? Were you reading all of Baldwin? Were you more towards his essays or his novels? Was there one that really stood out to you?
Personally, I always found of his essays. But the first book that, of course, blew up everything, that was The Fire Next Time. And that's the book, I must have given it like 500 times to friends and young people I met. It's like
his publisher thanks you.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I should be part of the company by now. So it's a small book, and it's really very personal and intimate, and it's really, it opens the door for all the rest of Baldwin. And I think when you start with this book, you basically try to read everything that he's written.
So tell me about how this project came about, this film project.
Well, it was, I was still living in the States, and I was looking for my next project. It was after, I think, sometimes in April with HBO. And I asked my dear lawyer and friend, Nina Shaw, about, what is with Baldwin's right? Do you think I could maybe try to get an option about one of the book? And
You were thinking about adapting one of his books.
it
as
was
opposed to making a
unclear.
film
I
about
just knew that I have to go back to Baldwin and do something. And it was also a time where Baldwin had totally disappeared from the, there are a new generation of author, and Baldwin was in the mind of many people a sort of has-been, and the generation of people like Toni Morrison and these people, they knew still, Baldwin was really important to them, but after that Baldwin is a reference, but not really, we don't feel that he is embedded in today's reality, which is of course totally false. And then, Nina at first said, well, forget it. And then, yes, we did write a letter. And we had a response within 3 days. And they asked me if I would be willing to come to Washington and meet them. And I went there, and I met the person who opened the door to me was Gloria Carifa-Smart, James Baldwin's sister. And it was like I was coming back to a family. To my family. And she have seen my film, she have seen Lumumba, and for her, Lumumba was a very important film, and that opened all the doors for me.
So that begins a conversation about doing some kind of film work with Baldwin. How did it lead to this film?
Well, once I had the rights, like on everything Baldwin ever wrote, books, letters, essays, fictions, speeches, etc. So I had a huge responsibility. I knew I could not just make a film on Baldwin. And I knew it would be a unique film and the only film probably. So it took me time to find the right entry to the subject, I knew the film even formally had to be different. I knew that I didn't want to interpret Baldwin. I wanted Baldwin center stage. His words should be center stage. No talking heads in the film. So to do that, I really needed something. And also because I also always work from reality, I needed a story and even my own story, how to link it to this film. And 4 years after that, Gloria gave me a letter and a bunch of notes. And it was a letter that you see in the beginning, a letter to his literary agent, telling him that he wants to write a book about 3 of his friends, and that the book was about America, and like an ultimate book on America. And of course, he never wrote that book. He never got to write it. And then for me, that was the moment. I said, well, I think he did write it, but it's in all his book, in all his body of work. And I just had to search for it and put it together.
So the framework is around this unfinished manuscript, really a sketch of a book that was going to be called Remember This House,
Yes.
about these 3 fallen leaders. And then what you do in this film is you weave other texts of Baldwin in it. One of my favorite sections is when you're taking from his book about film, The Devil Finds Work. Can you talk about how, I'm not even aware of like how many different texts you are weaving into this.
Well, of course, even though the film I stated it's a film written by Baldwin, because every word in this film is Baldwin. I didn't add any word from my part. Maybe a name sometimes, because he gave only the first name, so I added the last name. But other than that, I did not. But at the same time, it was my choice of text. I knew about those film critics written by Baldwin, and that was a major attraction for me, because the film is about images as well. Real images about the mythology of Hollywood, about the creation of the black image in Hollywood, by Hollywood. So I knew that those texts has to be in the film, and also I needed a visual vehicle throughout the film. So of course, it was everything I wanted to do, and all those texts, I grew up with those texts, so I knew them. So the choice had to be, of course, a story. It has to have a narrative, and I had to find the appropriate images also. And not only those images as an illustration of the text, but images and text should create a third level of experience. So that was a very difficult mixture to get to. And also something that I never thought would be possible is how do I have in the same film footage of Baldwin speaking publicly and also a voice which is supposed to be Baldwin at the same level. And
There's two, in my mind, prominent pieces of archival with Baldwin speaking. One is the Dick Cavett conversation that we saw a little bit of, and another is, which is from 1968, and I think the other one is also from 1968, a conversation with Kenneth Clark. And does that Kenneth Clark conversation take place after Martin Luther King's death in 68?
No, it's almost the same period. I think within a few weeks of distance, if not the same week.
Is was there more that you could have drawn from, or was it a pretty limited selection of filmed interviews with Baldwin that existed?
No, there are hours, and the Dick Cavett show itself is a document, because in it it's everything. It's the system, it's Baldwin, is how the public saw Baldwin or somebody like Baldwin, and it tells a whole story. It's 45 minutes long, but I couldn't, of course. The most difficult part was to know what to take, what to keep, so that I did not, shape the film only through those footage. I knew they were really valuable, but on the other hand, I'm making a film, and the film has to have its own identity. So there are many films with Baldwin and with even his involvement. And that's why a lot of time I put those credits to this film, because for me they are important films as well, and they are complementary to that. But this should stay as Baldwin own voice, own point of view, and I try to be as faithful as possible to who he was and to what did matter to him. And so it was for me, it was a condensed Baldwin, and that will enables you to go everywhere in his work. And I hope the film will do that. It is just a beginning, and to go back to Baldwin, because you need to know Baldwin today, especially.
You're using Baldwin's words to tell the story. Picking a voice for James Baldwin is a key element to this film. Can you tell me about how you found that voice for Baldwin?
Well, I know most of my films have voiceover, and I learned that more than just somebody that have a great voice or is well known, what you really need is that the voice can create a character, totally independent, who has his own soul, his own feelings. And so I needed somebody who not only represented something, but also who could delve inside that character and create it. And I had a list of 6 to 8 well-known actors, black actors, and the criteria were diverse, and also one of them was somehow your credibility as a human being, and what you meant to the population at large and what you represent. And Samuel Jackson came on top of that list very early on, and is the first one we approach, and also through my lawyer Nina Shaw. And he accepted it very quickly, and he read the text. He saw the edit that we had at the time, and we set up a time for the recording. And I didn't have any particular direction to him besides telling him, whatever you say, it have to come from the inside. No distance to the text. You are the text. You are Baldwin. So work with it as you would do for any role on stage. You know, actors on stage know how to work that. They have a text and they really play with the text until they own it. And this is what we needed for this voice.
It's really extraordinary because I think he does embody Baldwin's words, and even when he's being juxtaposed with Baldwin himself, it's not as it's not as discordant as you might think it is. I mean, Samuel Jackson doesn't necessarily have, you know, James Baldwin's same timbre of voice,
not at all.
but he somehow embodies the spirit of it.
Yeah. Well, that's the strength of cinema. The convention is so strong that you just accept it, and then you don't ask the question anymore. You are in the film, and that's why you need a great actor to have the humility to submit to that, and not, you know, try to put your ego in front. And a lot of people didn't even realize that it was Samuel Jackson.
No.
And so it was, yes, that's part of the work. How do you make sure that you know, you don't go out of the film because of the voice, but the voice is the film already, and there is no confrontation.
Let me ask you about the title, I Am Not Your Negro. When we first got this film early in the summer, it was then tentatively titled Remember This House, and then you shifted the title. Tell me about that.
Well, remember this house is, I love the title. I keep it during the whole editing process, and I really wanted it, but I realized that each time I tell the title, I had to explain, you know, what the film is, why it's called like this, and then the Bible reference with the title, nobody really understood it. And also for foreign countries, it's not as evident. You know, you can't even give the connotation of this house with the different meaning of this house. You know, in different language, it's not as subtle. It doesn't have this historical or biblical sense. So I made a list again of 30, 35 different possible titles, and I had preference, of course, and I tried them with friends, colleagues, writers, friends, and one of them being Russell Banks, and we came up with this one, which was perfect. It was not too offensive, but at the same time, it does say what the film is, and it takes a stand, simply. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't ask for pity or for whatever. It just takes the stand and say what it is.
We saw in the clip of the first few minutes you bringing in some contemporary images, and I wanted to ask you about your ideas behind connecting this text from 30, 40 years ago to what's happening today.
Well, from the start, I knew the film would have different levels. And one of it was, again, about images in terms of content, about also images in terms of format. You know, we use everything, 16 millimeter, 35, videos, all sorts of videos. You know, some of the footage were not good quality, black and white, color. So that level of telling the story was, for me, as important. And I knew that some of the image of today should be the sharpest possible. You know, when you see the swamp or when you see Times Square. And it's to be able to navigate throughout those last 40 years as if it's one piece, because that's what it is about. Where is, you know, what are the real change since 40 years. The discourse is almost the same. The argumentation is almost the same. And it's like if, yes, there have been progress. Yes, there have been many changes. Even the fact that I can make this film and show it probably to an audience in the US is a big change. But fundamentally, we are still in the same conversation as we were in 40, 50 years ago. So, and that goes through the images also. And I know I needed to play with that. Like, I didn't want to, by example, take the civil rights images that we know and I've seen many times. I knew I couldn't use them like this. So I colored them, you know, all the colored images. That's what we did, because I wanted to break that pattern where today when you start seeing those images, the dogs, the policemen, we have seen them so many times, and actually they don't mean anything anymore. So I had to break that. And also when shooting, I sent a crew to Ferguson during the protest. And so those footage, we changed them in black and white, which play also to the putting the story together. So all these different devices were important also to, without being, you know, in the front like this, but for me, they tell also a story, and they help you navigate as well in understanding. It's just one time, and when we see Robert Kennedy saying in 40 years there will be a black president, there might be a black president, and then we just had a black president, and it's going to end, and we have to ask ourselves, what did change fundamentally? You know, we had him, you know, this promise to have a black president. And Baldwin has a great line about that. He said, the real question about having a Negro president is not when will be the first Negro president, but what country he will be the president of. And that's the real question.
Well, your work has touched upon Haiti, it's touched upon Congo. You live in Paris, where you're the head of a film school there. And yet this film is highly focused on what's happening in America right now. And I wonder, you know, how that has your attention, you know, given that you're not living in America right now.
Well, I do, in fact. I've been always back and forth. I can't say that I don't live here. My family live here. My daughter lives here. So I grew up with all these places at the same time. I have a very strange and privileged life that I could, I went to school in Brooklyn, in public school. I went to school in France. I went to school in Congo. And I kept all those places at the same time because somehow it gave me the distance as well. So I feel I'm totally included in the United States, but at the same time, I have the distance. You know, and I saw that in certain images I choose at some point. My American friends did not have the same irony toward those images because they see them every day and they lost track of them, what they actually mean. And so this is something I use a lot in my work because it allows me to have a distance, to be inside and at the same time to be able to be outside. So this particular film, it's about my youth here also, those images, you know, when for me, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, they are in the kitchen of where I lived in my uncle's house in Brooklyn. There was this, you know, those velvet rugs on the wall that you could buy in every street corner. That's part of my youth, and I remember looking at that thing on the wall and something was wrong with it for me. You know, it was like a mythological picture. And so those things, revisiting, you know, the film is revisiting all these Tarzan, Stagecoach, John Ford, John Wayne, Doris Day. Those are the images of my youth that frame me as well. So this film is also something like a memoir. And the fact that I wanted this film totally embedded in the US, it's because it will have also a greater impact toward the rest of the world, because it gives it legitimacy here. And although I think the film is as important for European, for France, for the UK, for all, because all those countries also have similar problem, although they don't want to acknowledge it, but they have similar problems.
Something your film reminded me is how much Baldwin loved movies and how much he was involved in movies that really never got made by and large. He describes on the day that Martin Luther King was killed in 1968 that he was in the middle of writing a screenplay about Malcolm X, where he hoped that Billy D. Williams would play Malcolm X. What do you, when you think about the projects that Baldwin, the film projects that Baldwin was involved with, you know, which ones stand out to you? Which ones would you most like to have seen? What do you take away from his, you know, kind of, you know, unhappy experience, all these unfulfilled dreams?
It's very difficult to say because he was at a time where, again, he was one of the most famous writer, black or white, and he wanted to do so much, and without having really the infrastructure for it. He wanted to write plays. He did wrote a few plays. He wanted to write screenplays, and I read I think it's published, the Malcolm X screenplay. But of course, it's unfilmable. It's like it would cost 500 million. You know, he has in 3 lines there are, you know, just one setup where you see a lot of birds and flies, and that would cost $1 million just to do that. But again, I like the poetry of the way he wrote that screenplay, and today you would do probably 3 seasons on Malcolm X with that, which is the ambition he had. To those people were so important that they should have that much screen time, and but at the same time, it was almost too early. I mean, today Baldwin would have agent, manager, companies. Everything, you know, like a lot of today's the rappers, they are in fashion, they are in record, they are in this, and you know, this business takes a big part of that. And at the time, Baldwin did not have that kind of infrastructure and demand. So, but those a lot of that work are for me sometimes incomplete, of course, but they are important because he touches each time the basis of very important subjects. He was like the first one to open your eyes to those projects, you know. And there were a few like, you know, Hansberry, you know, the
Lorraine
same,
Hansberry.
Lauren, and they were young and they were opening, you know, wide range of subject and point of views, and they did not get to go, you know, as far as they should have, you know, for many reasons.
Well, that raises the question: what is your infrastructure when you're trying to make a film like this? How have you built your career?
This is something that I learned very early on, and especially because I did not set out to become a filmmaker. For me, images, film were something you do on the side. My father had a photo camera, he had a Super 8 camera. I used to play with it, use it, but it was not something coming from Haiti, a poor country, and for many other reasons that did not sound serious, to go into the movie business.
It still doesn't, by the way, no
yes,
matter where you come from.
Yes. And then I didn't have a lot of example to follow. So I studied 7 years industrial engineering, and I became an economist and an engineer, and that was supposed to be my profession. Everything else, writing, photos, was something you do on the side. And until I was doing so much on the side, politics, I was very involved in many groups, and also in film, documentary, fiction. A lot of my friends were filmmakers. And I decided not to work in my field, or let's say, to work differently. And so I decided to go back to film school for another 4 years. And I was much older, I was 26, so I knew enough of life so that this decision was really clear-eyed. So I knew that why I was going to study film. And film was never about telling stories or being an artist. It was always from the get-go as an engagement, as a way to fight, as a way to open doors. It was an instrument, never a means for itself. So with that attitude, I knew that I had very early on to be independent, not to depend on anybody who would tell me what should be the content of my films. So the first time I create my company. So after my first film, in fact, I had 2 partners who wanted me to develop a movie which would become Lumumba. And after 2 years, I was a partner. After 2 years, I bought their shares, and I own the company, Velvet Film, which is still my company. And this is what helped me sustain all the film I made, which were all difficult film, difficult subjects, but I choose them, and I never let anybody choose for me. And the advantage of having a company is that you can start developing a project without asking anybody permission. And that was, that what helped me throughout the years. And also that I could, I work in France, I work in Germany, I work in the United States. And
You're trying to put your hand in lots of people's pockets.
well, let's say I found allies in all those places. And when I came up to a place where I couldn't go further, I just left. At one point, I left France because I felt that I was having problem, doing certain project. And I came back to the United States, and at a certain level, I felt that I couldn't do the project I wanted, and I went back to France with another project. So that saved me, basically. Throughout the year, 35 years or so, I'm doing this. That helped me a lot because I was never in a position. I never let myself to be in the position where you could, pressure me. It happened to me to be in a room where a producer say, okay, you need to, I don't know, change that character, or you need to cut 30 pages, and I say, no, you will kill the integrity of the project. And then they would say, well, there won't be any project. And then I say, well, there won't be any project. Silence. And, well, but let's talk. We can still find a solution. So to do that, you are risking everything. And you have to be ready to, I don't know, go back and open a hot dog kiosk, or something. So you can't bluff yourself. If you say it, you have to be able to back it up.
You have to know how to make hot dogs.
Yes. So, and you know, I've
Or you've always got that engineering degree, yeah.
yeah, exactly. I knew that I could always find a way to you know, to survive. But you, in that business in particular, if you let yourself cornered in a position where they feel that they can influence you, or you're scared that the film won't happen, then if you let go, you know, it's a compromise which has no limit. You know, if you compromise to that, you will compromise later on. There are always reasons to compromise in film. You know, you take 800 decisions a day when you're making a film. So, you know, if you start compromising, there is basically no limit.
I feel like in the last 30 years, we've seen these moments of attention to black cinema. In the 1980s, you had Spike Lee and John Singleton in that movement. 20 years ago, Cameron Bailey here at the festival created the Planet Africa section that ran for 10 years that was really looking to make international connections. And, you know, and I do think that the vision of Cameron, who once was my colleague before, now he's my boss, and take this credit for what it is, but I do think that Cameron's vision in shaping that 20 years ago, you see some of those hopes that were laid starting to pay off today. I mean, at this year's festival, there's, you know, more great examples of black cinema than I can think of at any other international festival in my experience. But we also know that, you know, sometimes these things are trends that, you know, rise and fall. What do you think needs to happen now that we see like a little bit of momentum happening right now? Where does that energy need to go?
That's a difficult question. I can try to answer it differently. First of all, I don't believe in those momentums. I've seen too many of them, all my life, all my professional life. In fact, I may say that I'm one of the few in my generation who survived. I know a lot of good friends who had film in Cannes, who won prizes in Cannes, who today cannot find money to make their films. My elders, people who I look up to, because they were the only one I could watch as example of what I wanted to do. People like Charles Burnett, like Haile Gerima, like Billy Woodbury, all those people, they hardly, Haile is still trying to make his film. Charles Burnett is still trying to make films. So I cannot say that it's better, because those guys should have been able to make their film in a proper way. And so, and I've seen others who came after them, who again made 2, 3 films, or people, women, people like Julie Dash, all those great women who disappeared at some point and who are struggling to make their film. And those were important people for cinema. There are somebody like Carl Franklin. I remember the One False Move. When I saw this movie, I was blown away. And for me, I said, wow, he made it. He's going to be the next Spielberg. Did not happen. And he made some film, and he's still working, I think. He's doing a lot of television series. But those people, they should have a pile of money and choose whatever project they want to make. And so to answer your question is, I don't know what the way will be or how we will get that. First of all, I think we will never get it from the industry. The industry will never say, here, do it, unless we take it. And the result for me is to be able to be in a room with an executive to whom I pitch my project. I have half an hour, and where I don't need to spend 25 minutes of that half an hour to explain who James Baldwin is and why he is important. So for me, that's the result we want to have. Whether you are a woman, whether you are gay, whether you are an Asian, we should be able to enter a room with somebody who knows where we come from, who knows our history, and where we can then have a discussion about film, about the process of making this particular film, and with what means you want to do it, to what, for what audience, etc., to talk film, and not to have to convince that you exist.
We have time to maybe take one or two questions from the audience. You can bring up the house lights. There's a microphone being passed around or out there in the world. So if you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Where's our microphone? I see, well, here, this gentleman here in the front row. It's Paul Sturtz, who runs the True False Film Festival in Columbia, Missouri.
Thanks, Raoul, for making such a great film. A few nights ago, you talked about how this film took 10 years to make, and I can really feel that. It's so deep and complex and so well made. I'm wondering if you could talk about what that gave you, that extra time that you might not have been able to accomplish if you were forced to make this in 2 or 3 years' time.
Well, that's what I was telling. I gave myself the time. I produced that film. So nobody was telling me or hushing me to finish it. I had great allies. Arte in France, they came in the project very early on. I gave them 5 pages, and they trusted me. And and the estate, they trusted me. They let me do the film. And I didn't have any money pressure to finish the film. And this makes the difference. You know, when you own your means of production, that's basic Marxism. You know, you own your means of production, and this film would have been impossible to develop in the U.S. Unless I would be a professor and I would, you know, be able to work on the weekends or in the summer, but I would not have money to develop it because most public money funding. They ask, without sometimes bluntly, sometimes much more discreetly, you know, you have to be balanced. You know, in a film like this, one particular foundation basically asked me that I have to be able to show both sides. You know, how can you make a film about Baldwin and, you know, I'm not both sides, I'm one side. You know, so. The most structure of funding, public funding, are very tough to get because, you know, what they ask of you is to be pure from the get-go. And we as artists, we are subjective people. We have a point of view. It doesn't mean we are right, but we have a point of view, and we confront the audience with the point of view. And there is no question of being in balance. You know, it doesn't make sense. You know?
I see a bunch of white guys holding up their hands.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay, we'll take the white guy questions. Okay, here's a white guy.
Another white guy, Bill Meyer from People's World and Hollywood Progressive. I've admired your work from the beginning. Your first documentary about Lumumba, the way you exposed the CIA involvement in his assassination. I know you're a revolutionary filmmaker, and I know you address class as much as race. You alluded to it last night in your introduction. This film was tremendous that you made. I wanted to know how you feel about selling the issue of race or class in movies. How easy is that to do?
How do?
Selling or marketing the issues of race and class in movies.
Well, it's how do you say? I come from a generation also who had part of the previous generation who was more political, more, film at the time, it was not important that they looked good. It was important, the content were important. The sounds might be totally bad and the image shaky, but it was about, the slogan and I try to keep the content but provide a great movie. That's something although all my films are political, but I make sure that I tell a story. I make sure that, there are images. I make sure that it's art. I make sure that it's poetry. I make sure that you enjoy watching this movie, whether it's political or not. So I don't have, I think I'm privileged that I never had to make sure that my films makes money. Not that I want to be poor or not earn a living. I have people working for me. I have to pay them. But once you finance your movie, it's about financing the movie. It's not about making a profit. If I can make a profit, so be it. I can use it to make another film. But so it's difficult to have those two sides in your head, because to make a profit, already what kind of compromise you have to make. So, and I understand that once I have people trust me with their money, TVs trust me, or produce or financier, I am obliged to give them a great film. I'm not obliged to give them profit. Okay?
On that note, we have to wrap it up. We're going to quickly turn the room around. We're going to be back here with the filmmakers of In Exile, where you can learn how to make a film for $100 a month. Thank you very much, Raoul Peck. We're so proud to present the world premiere of I Am Not Your Negro.